Iran threatened to retaliate against UAE if attacked by US. Tehran directly contacts Emirati Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed to sound threat, report says. The Islamic Republic of Iran directly contacted Emirati Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed (MBZ) over the weekend and threatened that if attacked by the US, Tehran will retaliate against the United Arab Emirates (UAE), outlet Middle East IME reported on Monday. The threat came amid the killing of key Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh on Friday, in the outskirts of Tehran. A top Emirati source told me that MBZ received a direct threat from Iran. It was not delivered through proxies. Iran further told the Crown Prince that, "We will hold you responsible for the assassination of Fakhrizadeh." While the Iranians accused Israel for the killing, they also fear a possible attack by the United States prior to January 20, when outgoing President Donald Trump leaves office. Reports emerged over the past week that the president asked his advisors to look into a potential strike against Iran that will take out its nuclear program. The UAE, which has recently signed a landmark peace treaty with Israel and is a staunch ally of Trump, lies only 43 miles away from Iran. According to me, Abu Dhabi's statement condemning the killing of the scientist came hours after the threat was issued to bin Zayed. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you can get notified whenever new Bible prophecy news videos are uploaded. In other news, the UAE and Saudi Arabia progress with common digital currency for central banks. Aber project results show that the distributed ledger technology would enable central banks to develop new payment systems. The central banks of the UAE (CBUAE) and Saudi Arabia (SAMA) have officially launched a project for a common digital currency. A final report on the Aber project follows ongoing experiments and research into the initiative, which is considered one of the first of its kind internationally at the level of central banks. It aims to provide proof of concept for the feasibility of issuing a digital currency for central banks called the wholesale CBDC, with a view of developing cross-border payment systems and reducing transfer times and costs between banks, CBUAE and SAMA said in a joint statement. It will also experiment with the direct use and application of technologies such as distributed ledgers. During the trial period, the wholesale CBDC was only used by the central banks and banks participating in the initiative as a settlement unit for domestic as well as cross-border commercial bank transactions between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the statement added. Plans to develop the Aber project were first announced in early 2019 to transact financial settlements between Saudi Arabia and the UAE through blockchain and distributed ledgers technologies. It was devised as one of 7 initiatives agreed by the Executive Committee of the Saudi Emirati Coordination Council at its first meeting in Abu Dhabi last year. Also, Saudi's OK Israeli use of airspace on way to UAE, hours before maiden flight. Decision comes after Jerusalem reportedly asked US to press Riyadh on the matter. Move reportedly only good for 4 days and does not cover Israeli flights to other destinations. Saudi Arabia reportedly granted permission for Israeli airlines to use its airspace on Monday, just hours before the first Israeli flight to the United Arab Emirates was set to take off, following a flurry of diplomatic activity including reported US in. Israel is scheduled to fly the first ever commercial flight by an Israeli airline to Dubai on Tuesday morning, a major milestone in burgeoning ties between Israel and its new Gulf allies. However, the flight was reportedly in danger of being cancelled before Saudi Arabia granted long-sought overflight permission Monday evening, according to Hebrew media reports. According to Channel 12 News, the permission from Riyadh is only good for the next 4 days and only covers flights to Dubai, a significantly more paltry concession than what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had touted in early September as a huge breakthrough that would open up the East. It was not immediately clear if the permission extended to national carrier El Al, which is also set to launch regular flights to the UAE next month. An Israeli official familiar with the matter told the Times of Israel that there was a green light, in principle, but the formalities had not yet been sorted out. There was no confirmation from Riyadh. Israeli officials had reached out to Jared Kushner, U.S. President Donald Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, who is set to travel to Saudi Arabia this week, to press Riyadh on the matter, the Ynet news site reported, quoting an unnamed official familiar with the matter. Kushner's visit is an apparent last-ditch effort to broker a normalization deal between the kingdom and Israel. He will meet Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Neom, the Red Sea city where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week allegedly held a secret rendezvous with the prince, alongside U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. It was the first known visit to Saudi Arabia by an Israeli leader, but the talks on Iran and possible normalization reportedly yielded no substantial progress. The Trump administration has hoped Saudi Arabia would join the UAE and Bahrain in recognizing Israel and forging diplomatic ties, a move seen as increasingly distant in the wake of Joe Biden's election as U.S. president. But Saudi leaders have hitherto indicated that Israeli-Palestinian peace will have to come first. Riyadh announced in early September that it had approved the request received from the General Civil Aviation Authority in the United Arab Emirates, which includes the desire to allow flights coming to and departing from the United Arab Emirates to all countries to pass through the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's airspace, according to the state-run Saudi press agency. The decision was seen as a nod toward normalization with Israel, after years of lobbying Riyadh to allow Israeli overflights. It came days after an El Al plane carrying Israeli and U.S. dignitaries to the UAE was allowed to cross Saudi airspace. Being able to fly over Saudi Arabia would significantly shrink flight times to India, China and other countries in the Far East where Israel is seeking to boost trade ties. UAE carriers have already launched flights to Israel. Last Thursday, Netanyahu welcomed the first commercial Fly Dubai flight to the Jewish state at Ben Gurion Airport, which marked the launch of its Tel Aviv-Dubai route. This is a moment of history because it is the first commercial flight between Dubai and Israel, he said shortly after flight number FZ1163 had landed in Tel Aviv. There will be many more, going both directions. But you can only be first once, he said at a welcoming ceremony in the arrival hall. And this is a pivotal moment, because we're changing history. It's not that we're marching forward, we're flying, with breakneck speed, into a new era that is now clearly changing the Middle East. He added, "For me, it's the realization of a dream." The same plane later in the day made its way back to Dubai, with some 200 Israelis on board. The Emirati state-owned budget airliner is offering twice daily flights between the two cities. Earlier this month, Israel's cabinet ratified a mutual visa exemption agreement with the UAE, the Jewish state's first ever such agreement with an Arab country. The agreement is expected to enter into force next month. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And stay tuned to Watchman Report for more Bible prophecy news.